Good afternoon, good evening to all of you who are connecting from different countries in Latin America and other regions. Welcome to a new webinar of the Low Emission Resilient Development Strategies Regional Platform, Let's LAC. My name is Ana Maria Majano. I'm the coordinator of the Let's LAC Secretariat. I work at the Tropical Agriculture Research and Higher Education Center. And we are very happy to have already almost 100 people connected to this transmission. I would like to give you a little background on this discussion that we are going to have today with support from the Euroclima program of the European Commission. Since 2015, at Let's LAC, we have been promoting dialogue and exchange of experiences and collaboration amongst Latin American countries and organizations on how to integrate the agendas of mitigation, adaptation, and development. And we have had several dialogue and exchange activities, such as online discussions, webinars, and also 2 expert workshops. And in that work, we have found that one of the main challenges of integrating mitigation and adaptation is metrics. And last year, in the expert workshop we had in October in Costa Rica, we discussed how this challenge is made greater because of the differences in advances in metrics between adaptation and mitigation. I think there is, and we know there is agreement and methodologies and systems that to measure mitigation, of course, that need to be strengthened. But in adaptation, we still need to work more. But we also, in the discussion, saw the advances that several organizations all over the world are doing in trying to measure adaptation. And that's why we decided also to organize this webinar with the support of Euroclima and with the participation of our 2 panelists today to help to promote the more work and more discussion and more collaboration on this issue on how to monitor and evaluate adaptation. So today we are very fortunate to have the participants of Nathan Engel from the World Bank, senior climate change specialist from the World Bank, who will present to us the work that the bank is doing in developing an approach to monitor and evaluate resilience. And we will have comments from Eduardo Robelo Gonzalez, a climate change adaptation consultant from the Secretariat of Environment and Natural Resources of Mexico, presenting the work that Mexico is doing in this area. So I really thank Nathan and Eduardo for being with us today. We will have both their presentations first, and we will have then afterwards about 45 minutes for participants to send us their comments and questions. I will ask you to please keep your questions for after the presentations. You can write them in the question section of your of your control board, and I will read them to the panelists. So we are ready to start with the presentation from Nathan. Nathan Engel is Senior Climate Change Specialist for the Climate Change Strategy and Operations Team at the World Bank. He is involved with efforts to integrate resilience into World Bank strategies and operations, and is currently leading projects on climate finance, drought policy and water management, and resilience monitoring and evaluation. Nate completed his PhD at the University of Michigan's School of Natural Resources and Environment, and also earned master's degrees at the University of Michigan in Public Policy and Natural Resources and Environment. Nate, thank you for being here with us today. I give you the floor for your presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Ana Maria. So it's really a pleasure to be back on the webinar and again presenting to the Let's LAC group. I was fortunate enough to participate in the workshop back in September in Panama, and then I also presented a presentation on the monitoring and evaluation of resilience, similar, if not identical, to the one that I'm doing today at the October event in Costa Rica. So I'm really honored to be able to come back, and I'm really excited at the participation, because this is an important topic, and I think it's obvious by the participation in this event. So I work, as Ana Maria said, in the climate change group, a team called the Strategy and Operations team, and really there's about 300 or so of us, maybe slightly less, that work on climate change in our institution. And our mandate is essentially to integrate resilience and adaptation and mitigation across everything that we do in the institution. And my area of expertise is within resilience and adaptation, and even more particularly in water resources management and issues around drought. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing with a project on monitoring and evaluation within the World Bank. But first set the context by describing why is it so important that we are doing this, and that there's an increased focus on this now. There's an impetus around the NDCs that just show how much the needs are, and I'll go into that a little bit. And then the demand that follows from that for measuring our progress. There is an opportunity and a need to learn from what we're doing, whether it works or not. And while this presents challenges, I think that there are significant opportunities to improve the way that we're doing things and to learn from one another. So you all are well familiar, I'm sure, with the nationally determined contribution statistics that are out there, but our group here has done an analysis back, I think in September or so, that looked at the costs of the NDCs. And if you look at the circled area there, the Latin America, Caribbean region, you'll see that there are 30 countries, at least at the time, that had submitted or completed NDCs that included adaptation. And only 6 of them had actually provided the figures that were able to estimate the costs of this. Now, if you look at adaptation costs that have been estimated, there are only 5 countries, but the total is near 20 billion. So if you were to multiply that out by 30 countries, that's well over $100 billion in needs for adaptation and resilience. And if you look at the whole of what the NDCs show across the poorest countries, there are between 800 and 900 billion, dollars in resource needs for implementing the NDCs by 2030, or about $60 billion a year. So this creates a tremendous need for the finance to flow into these areas, but at the same time, the need for understanding whether these financial flows are actually having an impact and doing what they're intending to do. So there's been a few decades or so of work around what it means to have adaptation effectiveness, and now more recently what it means to build resilience. And you can see there are various frameworks, this one from the UN, this one from Environment Canada, this one from the Pilot Program for Climate Resilience or of the Climate Investment Funds, and this one, another one, I think it's from Tango International, where there are theories of change or results frameworks for measuring what it means to be actually making an impact with these dollars and investments in projects. So there's clearly a growing number of these that are out there. And alongside of that, there are many different kinds of indicators at different levels of the results chain that are measured across the different funds and within the different institutions. As you can see here, some are doing it at the transformational level, some are doing it at the impact level, others at the outcome level, and then again, some at the output level. But these are just indicators. These are just indicators, and what we find when we talk to people about our work on resilience is a lot of people want to jump immediately to the indicators and what are the right indicators to use for measuring resilience. And we've actually taken a step back from that in our approach. And I come from more of a technical background on resilience and adaptation broadly, but and not the monitoring and evaluation background. But we decided to actually focus what we're doing when we are trying to understand whether a project or an investment or what we call an operation, whether that is building resilience, we've opted to go back to the basics of what it means to have a solid monitoring and evaluation system. So this is thinking about having a results framework that then serves as the basis for indicators. Again, indicators are one part of the puzzle, an important part, but just one part. Then the monitoring and reporting system. And underlying all of this is thinking about evaluation from the beginning of the project design and through project completion and beyond on whether we've had an impact or not. And I'll talk a little bit about evaluation for accountability versus learning and why it's important to do both with resilience projects. So some basics, if you were to do a literature review, I'm sure that many of you have, but if you, and this will probably be familiar to you, but if you do a literature review of the basics that are out there for what it means to build resilience or what resilience is defined as, you'll find some commonalities there, and you see those first three sub-bullets, where there's usually an element of either a set of a community or people, economic assets, or biophysical systems that are exposed to a hazard or set of hazards. Then there's an emphasis on the ability of these elements to anticipate, respond, and recover from the hazards. And then there's usually a specific focus on a type of hazard or shock, where it's either an acute shock or a slow onset hazard that is an element of the definition. Now, what we've done is we've deduced, and there have been other literature reviews, many of them out there actually, that do this, but if you look at what are some of the common principles for what encompass resilience, you will see a strong emphasis on robustness and protection, preparedness, recovery, this idea of either diversity and or redundancy, integration, connectedness, flexibility, and so on. There's also an emphasis on adaptive capacity, learning, and transformation. So these are what I would call the basics of resilience, and I don't want to go too much into them because, again, you're probably quite familiar with them. But what we're seeing as you try to apply these principles to resilience building, monitoring, and evaluation, there are some very specific challenges that are potentially unique to resilience projects. The first is that most of the problems that we are dealing with as development practitioners and professionals or governments is that you would want to have a project that builds resilience is it's usually trying to address what would be called a wicked problem, or those problems that not only the stakeholders can't agree on the solution, it's hard to actually identify and agree upon what the exact problem is because there's so many complex dynamics going on. So because of that, there's a need for creative and adaptive solutions. However, methodologies for actually bringing in these adaptive solutions and creative solutions are really quite difficult, and resilience is quite challenging to measure for various reasons, not least of which because it often crosses different temporal scales and spatial scales, and the fact that it's a latent system property, meaning that it's not really understood or realized until after or during an event is happening, so you really don't know it's there. So there's a lot of other methodological difficulties, which I won't go into, but I think what this points to is that there's a heavy emphasis on this because a lot of people are trying to figure it out. It's a young field, but it's evolving quickly, and I think there are a lot of opportunities for practitioners like yourselves to get involved and just, and a lot of learning to share, and I'll get to that at the very end. But what we've deduced from all of our knowledge on this, all of the experience that's already out there, and then even within our own project teams, is that we're emphasizing the need to build as flexible as possible monitoring and evaluation systems that can be iterative and improved over time, and shift from focus solely on accountability or did the project meet the indicators that it set out to achieve, but also building in a learning element to it. How do we actually improve the way that we think about resilience? Is what we or the literature says is building resilience, is it actually true? Do we actually have evidence of this? So building that evidence base is really important to then feed back into what we're doing within the institution. And I'm not going to pretend that this is easy. It's a long process, and it will be a continued long process to actually build this into the culture of our own institution. Now, because of the context specificity of resilience, and the way I think about that is that there's what builds resilience in one area may not be what builds resilience in another area. There's an even more important emphasis on having local, people who are within the community that are affected by the project. This is good practice in general, but it's even more important for resilience building because there's an importance to craft the narrative on what builds resilience within a specific community or region. Now, and similarly, because of the complexity about resilience and the cross-scalar nature and the difficulty to translate some of these principles into practice, there's a tendency for people to want to create really complex frameworks and reporting systems and monitoring and evaluation systems. But I think as much as possible, it's even more important to build the capability of the communities and the governments that we work with to actually do this themselves. So building off of the, keeping it as simple as possible when you can, to build the capacity and needs and research needs and abilities to actually do this within their own institutions. So what we've done over the last year and a half is we've embarked upon a project that we call REM&E, which is short for Resilience Monitoring and Impact Evaluation for Climate and Disaster Resilience Building Operations. And we're about midway through or so. My guess is that the project's going to get extended because there are many different ways that we can take the project and probably too many demands for the work beyond what we can fulfill. So we'll probably extend the project. But what this project is set out to do is to integrate monitoring and reporting of resilience building into our projects on a project by project basis by giving guidance and toolkits around theories of change and results frameworks, indicators, and measurement methodologies. There's also then the idea that this stuff will be better applied within projects, and in particular, we have an emphasis on how to give guidance on doing impact evaluation studies and resilience building operations. The idea is then in the end, while we won't have a systematic, or excuse me, we won't have a sole universal indicator for what builds resilience across the institution there, and I'll get into that in 1 second in the next slide. But at least there's improved narrative and understanding and what you might call harmonization of the frameworks that projects are using around resilience building activities within our institution. So what we decided was rather than focusing on developing one indicator, at least in the beginning, and trying to say this is our resilience indicator for the institution, for our projects have built this amount of resilience or that amount of resilience, we think that that's an extremely challenging, if not impossible, task to do, because what builds resilience and you think back to the list of principles I put up, what builds resilience in the agriculture sector, for example, is probably quite different than what builds resilience in the transport sector. And there are different elements that those projects would probably tend to emphasize from what it means to build resilience, different principles. And because of that, we decided to take more of a sector-based approach where we would work with our sector specialists and what we call our practice groups, which are divided by sectors, to give guidance on integrating resilience considerations into their monitoring and evaluation. So this is to develop with them indicative or illustrative results frameworks that would then lead to examples of indicators that teams could use, and ultimately a more coherent narrative within the sector on what it means to build resilience. And we're in the process now, or in the next couple months, of actually working with the teams to test some of the frameworks that are being developed. And these are some of the sectors that we're working with on this sector-focused process. And here's an example of what we intend this to feed into ultimately. So we will take eventually the narrative in the agriculture sector or the transport sector for building resilience to climate and disaster risks, what that means overarching for our institution. So we'll be working towards at least an illustrative results chain or framework for the practices that fall within the sustainable development family. There are about 6 here, where we're going to hopefully have these sectoral narratives feeding into a broader narrative. So while we won't be able to say that we have a number on resilience across the institution, we'll at least have a narrative for how it's being built through the different activities because of this foundation that's been laid with the results frameworks in each sector. Now, this is an example, this is my second to last slide, and this is an example of just an indicator review, a snapshot of an indicator review that we did for projects within our own institution that have intended to build resilience to climate and or disaster risks. These are either climate change adaptation projects, disaster risk reduction or disaster risk management projects, or projects that actually have resilience building in their development objective. Now, how to sift through this and recommend to teams which indicators are the right indicators to use in different contexts is, I think, quite futile task. So what this is some of having done this review in the beginning of our project, it was one of the motivating forces for why we decided to take more of a sectoral approach that was based on solid templates for results frameworks that could then be populated based on the sector themselves, and they pick the indicators that are most indicative for those outcomes and outputs. Now, what I want to leave you with is just a challenge to you that I think there's a tremendous opportunity for this group that's listening to pilot and test various frameworks that are out there, various theories of change, various indicator sets to really learn. We have a lot of learning to do on what truly does build resilience in different contexts. There's a tremendous need for building up the evidence base, and I think that the LEDS-LAC community has quite a network to be able to do that and share the learning, and I look forward to seeing some of the results as you embark upon that. One last thing I'll mention is that there is a community of practice that is starting to develop globally called the Resilience COP Community of Practice on Measurement, Evaluation, and Learning. And it's supported by the Rockefeller Foundation, and hopefully the word will start getting out on this, but the idea is to share experiences and build off of networks such as the LEDS-LAC group to actually learn and share experience and test and pilot some of these approaches. So stay tuned for more information on that, but I, again, thank you for allowing me to participate today, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Nate, and thank you for giving us the information on that community of practice. As I mentioned at the beginning, the focus of the work of LEDS-LAC in facilitating joint learning and exchange and collaboration is on the integration of the mitigation and adaptation agendas together into the development plans and strategies of the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. And in that, we of course want to build on the experiences of those communities that are working on issues that are important for this integration. As we mentioned, measuring resilience is one of those, and adaptation is one of those challenges. So we, want to learn as much as possible and contribute to bringing the knowledge already built in that practice to the Let's Lack community. So I hope that we will uh, continue to work together in these issues. I wanted to mention two things again. One is that please write your questions and comments in the question section in the control panel, and I will read them to Nate and Eduardo after both presentations. Second, some people have been asking, and I would like to mention that the recording of this webinar, together with the PowerPoint presentations and any other materials that the panelists provide us, will be available at the Let's Lack webpage in a couple of days. And also, I would like to mention that we have already almost 190 people connected from different parts of the world. So I would like to ask you, please, when you write your questions, please let us know where you are, so that we see our panelists can have an idea of what the situation in the countries are, because they, of course, have been in touch with different countries and regions, and they probably can focus better their answers if they know where you are writing from. So, and now I would like to welcome Eduardo Robelo. Eduardo has a bachelor's degree in atmospheric sciences from the University of Veracruz, Mexico, and a double master degree in environmental management by the University of San Luis Potosí, Mexico, and the FH Köln, Germany. He is currently a consultant for the General Direction of Climate Change Policy of the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources of Mexico in different topics related with the national adaptation policy development, the characterization of the adaptation component of the nationally determined contribution of Mexico, and also helping with the coordination of the Working Group on Adaptation Policies as a reviewer of climate change programs on different geographical scales, among other activities. Eduardo was also one of the participants in our experts workshop that we had on integrating mitigation and adaptation last October in Costa Rica. And we have asked him to share the experiences of Mexico and comment on Nate's presentation also. Eduardo, welcome. Thank you for being here with us. And please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, Maria. Good morning, everyone. Well, good afternoon, good evening. I don't know, depending on the place you are right now. First of all, in behalf of the General Direction of Climate Change Policy, I want to thank the Let's Lack regional platform for the kind invitation to share the Mexican perspective and experience on the topic of monitoring and evaluating adaptation to climate change. Now, once again, Ana Maria, Maria Jose, Alejandra, thank you for the opportunity. And of course, thank you to all of the audience for taking the time to participate. Hopefully, this will be an interesting session and an interesting presentation for you all. Also, I want to thank Nathan for your interesting presentation. It's gave the state of some key points, some key elements I will take again into consideration on my presentation. And like we already know up to this point, the objective of the webinar is related with increasing importance of adaptation in the different national agendas. And in my case, I will talk about the M&E experience in Mexico and how it's related with our policy instruments. Give me a second. Yeah, perfect. Now, I want to start showing you all this timeline, which contains some of the main instruments and tools that support our labor in what to adaptation to climate change refers. The main pillar of all policy related to climate change in Mexico is the Mexican General Law on Climate Change, which was approved in 2012 and which defines and regulates the elaboration and implementation of public policies on climate change adaptation, of course, also in mitigation. But for the matters of this presentation, I will only refer to the adaptation components of any of all the instruments that I will present. As a result of the law, also in 2012, we have the creation of a National Climate Change Fund, which has the purpose to attract and channelize public, private, national, and international financial resources to support the implementation of actions. In 2000, according to the timeline, we have another result of this law was the establishment of the Interministerial Commission on Climate Change, which is composed by the 14 national ministries, public health, public education, and of course, being the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, the one who coordinates it. One of the main objectives of this Interministerial Commission on Climate Change is to coordinate the actions of the federal public administration on climate change. Now, there are some key points I haven't remarked yet, but there are the reasons why adaptation is such an important strategy to face climate change. First is the fact that Mexico is highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Due to its geographical characteristic, we have two oceans surround us, we have big mountain systems that gave the opportunity to have different type of climates in the same geographical distribution of Mexico. But also we have the adverse social conditions suffered by a big part of the population. Therefore, there was the necessity of a guiding instrument that lead us in the short, medium, and long-term strategies for the country to face the impacts of climate change and, of course, transit towards a sustainable but also competitive economy. That's why in 2013, there was the creation of the National Climate Change Strategy, which contains, like I said, a medium and long-term vision, which is represented on the name itself. That is National Climate Change Strategy, 10, 20, and 40 years vision. This strategy describes the actions that should be taken by the three orders of government, but also encourage the society to take part of the different actions to face climate change. Now, like as we have in this National Climate Change Strategy, we have the vision of what should the public administration do and what should the society will encourage to do of this, the part of the society. But specifically to represent the contribution of the federal public administration, there was a need of a creation of the Spatial Climate Change System that was created in 2014 and has the contribution of the federal public administration for this period that we're up to now. It is between 2014 and 2018. Now, like I explained before, there is this Interministerial Commission on Climate Change that allows to coordinate the efforts on public administration, but like the National Climate Change Strategy encouraged the society to contribute, there was a need of the creation of a complete national coordination system. And this is the National System on Climate Change, which was created also in 2014. And it takes part this interministerial commission is part of it, but also has state representatives, National Association of Municipalities, the Federal Congress, and the National Institute of Ecology and Climate Change, which, by the way, is in charge of the evaluation of national climate change policies, which this particular work is in progress. And I will skip to the last part of the timeline, which is in 2016. Like you can see, there is, we are currently on this adaptation and mitigation policies evaluation. This process is taken by the National Institute for Ecology and Climate Change. Now, something Nathan said before in his presentation, and is a key element for mine, is the demand on the measure for the rate of advance of our INDCs. In 2015, Mexico presented its, well, back then, its intended nationally determined contribution that on 2016, with the Paris Agreement ratification made by Mexico, it's now only the NDC, not anymore the INDC, now it's the NDC. And between all these tools that I have speak a little bit about, there are some other instruments, some other guidelines, some that has been done over the years to reflect this position of Mexico, this important position of Mexico about adaptation. We have some examples like a prioritizing climate change adaptation measures tool deal with the component of adaptation of the GIZ. Also, we have some sectorial strategies like the 2040 strategy for natural protected areas with its correspondent strategy on climate change topic. Now I will enter into detail of some of these instruments and the way they relate with the M&E process, with the monitoring and evaluating process. And some, as you will see during my presentation, there are some links of this on the image of these instruments. So if you're interested, you can download it and review them carefully. And if you need some others that are not with the correspondent link, you can write to me, and my email is at the end of the presentation. Sorry, I have some problems. Yeah, perfect. Well, like I explained before, the top instrument on climate change policy in Mexico is the General Law on Climate Change, which states the principles in the formulation of national climate change policy. And in its Article 26, Paragraph 7, clearly states the necessity of the monitoring and evaluating process as part of the national strategy, and also identify how this process should be related with the reduction of vulnerability, strengthening of resilience, reduce risk, and identifying adaptive capacity opportunities. Finally, a big point of this General Law on Climate Change is the development of a climate change information system that has to generate a set key of indicator addressing, and I remark this, at least some of the following: vulnerability for human settlements, infrastructure, islands, coastal zones, and river deltas, economic activities, and environmental effects, all attributable to climate change, but also the protection, adaptation, and management of biodiversity. But like I said before, is at least the following. Now, a clear statement of the importance of the monitoring and evaluation system is reflected in our national climate change strategy. I already explained how this represents the medium and long-term vision of the country, but on the adaptation side, if you're interested, I will talk to you about the component of the adaptation that has three axes as you can read in the presentation, are focused on the reduction of vulnerability of the social sector, the reduction of vulnerability for strategic infrastructure and production systems, and finally, into the conserved and sustainable use of the systems, of the ecosystem, sorry. And between these three strategic axes, we have 41 lines of action with different and corresponding people attending them. But finally, we are here to talk about monitoring and evaluation. So as you can see in the image that I put over there, the adaptation to climate change component and the mitigation to climate change component are sustained by 6 pillars. And specifically, the number 5 is the one that remarks the need of implement mechanisms for monitoring and evaluating M&E systems. And at its point 5.1, it says to implement measurement reportable MRV, of course, but also monitoring and evaluation instruments for adaptation measures. And on the 5.2, there is an M&E to develop an M&E system for public policies, including climate change adaptation criteria and indicators. In relation with this last point, and like I explained, in relation with this last point, we will talk about some M&E examples that has been taking part here in Mexico, specifically the one related with the, sorry, I put it, this is in Spanish, the PEC 2014-2018 is actually the special program for climate change. This is Programa Especial para Cambio Climático, it was in Spanish, but it's a special program on climate change for a period of 2014 and 2018. It's an example of the M&E systems that we have taken here in Mexico. This is a diagnosis of current and future, it contains a diagnosis on current and future vulnerability of Mexico, 2 objectives, and 77 lines of action on adaptation. Now, like I explained before, this special program reflects the commitments of the public administration, only the commitments of the public administration. And the objective 1 is to reduce the vulnerability of the population in the productive sectors and increase their resilience as well as the resistance of the strategic infrastructure. And in order to give monitoring of this objective, we have 2 indicators, which are the percentage of progress in the development of instruments that help reducing the vulnerability of the population in the productive sectors, and the percentage of surface under territory ecological management programs or development urban programs that includes strategies or criteria on climate change adaptation. And on the objective 2, which is preserve, restore, and sustainable manage ecosystems, ensuring their environmental services for climate change and mitigation and adaptation, has an indicator which is a vulnerability decline index by means of infrastructure and actions for the preservation, restoration, and sustainable management of the natural capital. I will not talk more about these indicators. If you want to see them, if you want to consult them, you have over here the link to download this document. It's public for everyone to review it. It's in Spanish. This version is in Spanish. But if you write to me, I can make you English version, which is not online, but we can, from the director, we can send you an English version if it's more easy for you. And well, one of the main points I have to remark up to this point is that even so we have these indicators for the spatial program climate change, these indicators are not enough to incorporate all the topics like Nathan said, because it's a cross-sectoral effort in order to attend adaptation to climate change. So these indicators that I already mentioned are not enough to incorporate all the topics, all the different visions, all the different components that are adaptation to climate change. Therefore, exists this climate change information system, which I already talked a little bit before, which has the objective to generate, well, with the support of governmental agency, to generate a set of key indicators. I already said some of them, but I will say that this is our working process that is currently working. We are working in this national repository for indicators on climate change. Sorry. Well, finally, all these systems, we all said before, and the goal that we should aim, like Nathan said before, is on our now in our NDCs, not anymore intended. Now we're facing the NDCs, which is the next big challenge for all of the countries, particularly Mexico, because Mexico was one of the first countries to include a component of adaptation in its INDC. Well, it's an NDC right now, and this shows the big commitment of Mexico with this topic. But now the big challenge we have to face is, okay, we are already formulate our NDCs, but how are we going to measure the rate of success, or how are we going to measure how we're achieving our goals for NDCs? I will talk a little bit fast about the NDC of Mexico has unconditional adaptation actions, which are focused, like all of our guiding instruments, like the general law, the national strategy, on three main topics, which are adaptation to climate change for the social sector, which has big goals, that is to reduce 50% of the municipalities highly vulnerable to climate change. Also, we have the ecosystem-based adaptation X, which has this main goal of attain a deforestation rate of 0%, and an adaptation of a strategic infrastructure and productive systems that has this goal of generate early warming and prevention systems in the entire country against extreme hydrometeorological events. But we don't want to forget that we also have some conditional actions which will require, which will need the help of the international help, the cooperation with different countries in order to exchange and transfer technology, knowledge, for capacity building, and of course financing for adaptation. And the immediate challenge of this NDC we're facing right now is to detail and define the concrete actions we need to achieve these goals I already set. Because besides these general goals for all the access, we have some specifically actions for each component, for each axe. We have a total of 9 actions for the social component, 6 actions for the ABE, and 6 actions for the infrastructure protectiveness. So we are right now in the process, like I said, to detail and define the concrete actions to achieve this goal. We are in the process of the hows and the who's going to do it, how we're going to do it, how we're going to measure our rate of success. And for this, we have to strengthen the current M&E mechanisms that we have in Mexico and the international ones according to these ambitious goals that Mexico has proposed, and to the international requirements, of course. Now, sorry, I have a problem. There's a message that always repeats and don't let me transfer from one to another image. So now, from all of this I have told you, from all this path we have currently we're on and we have faced all over the years, we have identified some general challenges for an M&E system implementation. Some of them have been already mentioned by Nathan. There's not an universal indicator to measure adaptation success. It has to consider a long-term horizon. And adaptation, finally, is a multi-sectoral topic. It's a cross topic for different type of sectors, different type of people, different type of requirements. So all these differences reflects on the different requirements for the construction of the indicators. So it's not easy to construct just one universal indicator. And there exists this need of a strong coordination among the different decision-making levels. Of course, there's some uncertainty regarding to climate change and other global change that finally will also affect adaptation to climate change. And in the case of Mexico, and I think this is repeated in most of your countries, adaptation has a strong local expression, and I will remark this, has a strong local expression. And in the case of Mexico, has a wide type, because of Mexico has a wide type of ecosystem, cultures, social conditions. This requires specific planning, design, and execution of actions according to these different contexts. But because of these general challenges we have faced over the years, Mexico has developed certain strengths that can be, I want to share with you in order to, maybe you will like to take as part of your path that you're currently on. There is the capacity to generate periodic, strong, and pertinent information and this commitment would use the best science possible. Something I didn't mention is that the national strategy on climate change has a strong component of vulnerability assessment with climate change scenarios, data validation. So there is this need of using the best science possible. And over the years, with all these instruments that we have we have created a common vision in what to adaptation refers. We have some solid policy instruments that points forward to a common goals, and we have this big umbrella that will permit all of our actions, that is the general law on climate change, which states the concepts and paths to follow. Now, finally, I will talk other M&E examples in Mexico. Maybe you're interested in them, which are some of them. One of them is in collaboration with the Mexican-German Alliance for Climate Change. We develop an adaptation. Well, we're developing an adaptation to climate change indicator system that pretends to identify key information to report advances in topics like vulnerability reduction, resilience training, and increase of adaptive capacity. This is a working process, so if you want more information, you can contact us. Also, in National Commission for Natural Protected Areas, there is developing of a repository for adaptation indicators in natural protected areas. And as a part of this interministerial commission I already talked, there is a working group on adaptation policies, which is in Spanish is GETADAP, which in collaboration with the Technical Committee on Climate Change Information, that is in charge of this big national system on climate change I already mentioned, to identify key indicators specifically for adaptation measurement, and to put them in this repository of the climate change information system. And finally, I will talk of another example. Something I forgot to mention up to this point is that besides I'm a consultant in the direction of climate change policies, I'm also part of a project which is the Resiliencia project in Spanish, which is with the financing of the Global Environmental Facility, the GEF, and implemented by the Natural Protected Areas with the help of the United Nations Development Program. Is this sorry, I'm really sorry. Is this strengthening management effectiveness and resilience of protected areas to safeguard biodiversity threatened by climate change, but also better known as Proyecto Resiliencia, the Resilience Project. And this project aims to increase the resilience and adaptive capacity of the natural protected areas as a socio-environmental system, while looking to generate lessons that help the development of indicators on certain topics, which are 7 topics, is to keep the diversity and redundancy, to increase the connectivity, because more connected ecosystems are more health ecosystems. Consider a slow response and feedback variables. Climate change is not something that will be stayed in it's a changing process. So we have to consider these feedbacks that will be that will be increasing vulnerability, will be increasing the hazards of climate change. So we have to consider these feedback variables. Also, to explore the complex adaptive system thinking, we have to consider ecosystems as not only the green part, but also the social persons that are affected and are living in and with the help of these ecosystems. To promote learning is a very important thing in the project, is to promote learning of these lessons that we have developed in order to strengthen resilience, but to participate in order to encourage participation in all the process that will encourage this project, and finally to promote the polycentric governance. And this means that any of the people affected or in these natural protected areas has a voice in order to give some ideas on how to face climate change. Well, that's all for me. I don't know if you have any question. I haven't read the chat, so hopefully this has been an interesting presentation for you all. I will leave you here my email address. Like I said, I'm part of the direction of climate change policies by the Semarnat, and also as part of this project Resiliencia. Also, like I said before, you have the links in all the presentation to get access for the instruments I already spoke. But if you need more information about them, you can write to me. Well, thank you very much.
Eduardo. Thank you very much, Eduardo. We have some questions. I would say many questions. And I'm going to read them to you. I will try to group them together. And also, I would like to inform some people who have asked questions that are specific on requesting information not related to the topic, that I will put them in contact either with Nate or Eduardo to answer directly. So we will read here the questions that are related to the topic of the presentation and put you in contact for other more specific questions. So Nathan, I will read to you. Well, there are 3 questions, 2 that are I think almost the same and require a very quick answer, and then another question, and then I will read another for Eduardo to start the first round of comments from you. Jose Bernardo Gochoco and Jean Roger Rakotoarojana. I'm sorry if I don't read your last name well. They want to know how they can access the World Bank indicators, if there is a manual. Jose Bernardo asked whether there is a guidebook or manual for the M&E framework that you are implementing in your resilience projects. And also Kelly Witkowski from the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation and Agriculture asked Nate to speak a bit about linking or nesting indicators or enhancing their coherence at the project program level into the national level. And for Eduardo, Rodrigo Villate, who is a technical advisor for GIZ in Costa Rica, he asked about the system of information on climate change, whether it is operating currently, and whether it contemplates synergies between and co-benefits between mitigation and adaptation. And if it is so, what were the steps to get there? So Nate, can you please start with your questions, and then I'll give the word to Eduardo.
Yes. So thank you, Jose, John, and Kelly. I think to answer all three of them um, with the same response, and then go into very quick specifics. The work is in progress on all of these things. So on the first 2 points, an indicators or manual of the frameworks, that we don't have that available yet, and the primary audience for this work is internal. So we'll be developing this information and these toolkits and guidance for our teams, but there is the intention of sharing publicly a draft or a broad guidance document on how to do all this, which won't be ready for probably for the next couple of months, at the earliest probably in June. But what I can share with you, if you email me, I'm happy to share with you a scoping study that we did, which really set the context for the work and pushed it into a certain direction, which was based on what was available, best good practice that was available within the field at the time. And this scoping study was more or less, I don't want to say endorsed, but it was the topic of discussion on an international workshop that we held to kick off the program. So it has feedback and inputs from various people and experts from around the world and within our institution. So I'm happy to share that that is a public document. And then if you stay in touch and ping me back in up in June or July, I'm happy to get something to you. If we've actually produced the public version of some of our materials by then, but that is the intention. And then to Kelly, hello. The linking and nesting indicators question is an excellent question. It's one that we are struggling with right now internally. We've had 2 separate streams going right now within our institution, within our team. One was on resilience indicators on the national level to understand socioeconomic resilience, and then there is the work that I described. We are now starting to nest them and link them together, and all I can say is that's a work in progress, and we don't have a lot of results yet, but hopefully within the next, and that's actually one of the directions that we are taking this work in the next year or 2, and why we'll extend the project, because we need to make more concrete links between these. So unfortunately, nothing quite yet to show for that, but they're both, all 3 are great questions.
Thank you, Nate. And I would like to mention that if you have some documents that are public and that you would like to share with the participants, we can also upload them onto the site for the webinar, where we are also going to have the recording of the webinar and the PowerPoint presentations.
Great.
So if you or Eduardo have materials to include there, please send them to us, and we will make them available to the participants through the web page. Eduardo, regarding the national information, the climate change information system, and the synergies between adaptation and mitigation.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. Yes, to Rodrigo. Yeah, actually, it's currently working. This national climate change information system is currently working and contains a big amount of information about climate change. But in regards to the repository of indicators, it's still a working process. Actually, like I mentioned before, there is this working group on adaptation policies, as part of the efforts of the Interministerial Commission, which is currently working on the identification of some indicators of adaptation to include in this repository. And the responsibility of the national information system is a big effort from all of the public federal administration ministries, but is coordinated by the National Institute for Statistic and Geographical Information, INEGI. And there has been some committees for developing and addressing key indicators, which is, like I said before, is a working process. And we have, in collaboration with this working group of adaptation policies, we have developed, we actually developed a workshop in November of last year, just a couple of weeks after the workshop in Costa Rica for the Let's Lack platform. And we addressed some basic points in order to identify indicators. And we have the commitment of continue this work. So during this year, hopefully we'll have identified some key indicators that will be part of this repository, and hopefully will be public to all of you to see during this year. I'm not like in the in the stance to say when it's going to be available, because like I said before, it's not for responsible. We're not the responsible of updating this system, but we're working on this repository of adaptation indicators. And regarding to the synergies between mitigation and adaptation, yes, it's a big part, it's an important part we have considered. Like I said before, during this workshop, we identify some key elements that should be considered for the selection of the indicators, and one of them that here in Mexico consider it's a really important one is this synergy that has to have a synergy and co-benefits both for mitigation and also adaptation. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you, Eduardo. I will then ask a new batch of questions for Nathan from Lila Katiwada regarding building resiliency indicators. Who prepares those indicators? External experts, the beneficiaries, communities? In other words, she says, where is the place for participatory method in building those indicators? And also we have a question from Shaikhom, a National Postdoctoral Fellow of the Directorate of Cold Water Fisheries Research, Indian Council of Agricultural Science. Thank you for joining us from India. My question is, she says, can participatory rural appraisal tools, such as semi-structured interviews, be applied for monitoring and evaluation processes of adaptation, particularly in assessment of innovations retaining in indigenous people? Those two for Nate, which I think are related, and for Eduardo, from Miguel Chavarria. He asked, thank you for the presentation, Eduardo, and asked how well Mexico is doing towards achieving the NDCs. Is there going to be a revision needed to adapt the initially established objectives or levels of ambition due to the current national financial situation? And also there is one regarding what you mentioned, the uncertainty. Let me, Eduardo, and this is very specific for you. It sounds like there is a lot of progress, but there are what are some of the challenges that you are still trying to confront for monitoring and evaluation for adaptation? And what are the major gaps that you are still trying to fill? So Nate, please, if you can address your two questions, and then Eduardo, your question.
Yes, so thank you. Again, two great questions, and I do think, Ana Maria, you're right, they're quite related. So I think it varies project by project for who actually selects and identifies the appropriate resilience indicators. The ideal situation is as follows. The team that's working on the project that gets requested by the World Bank for the World Bank by the by the client or the country government would ideally have close collaboration and working either through their ministries that are in charge of, or sub teams that are in charge of the monitoring and evaluation systems, and would include a consultative process where there's participation from the community on developing what the appropriate indicators are. And again, this depends on the type of project and just the scope and the scale of the project. But ideally, there would be something like a workshop where they're developing a theory of change or a results framework, and then identifying the most appropriate indicators to track, because they are indicators that are agreed upon by the World Bank and the government in the end. And then in that process, I think getting to the second question to our colleague from India, I think absolutely participatory rural appraisal could be one method that they agree on as their monitoring method. It could also be done for evaluation. They could use semi-structured interviews to do the evaluation component. So yes, we've seen projects that do that, but you have to keep in mind, as I was alluding to in my presentation, that it can get quite expensive to do new, big surveys and things like semi-structured interviews. But that's not to say that they're not important, nor that they're not done. It is quite common to do those sorts of approaches, and the extent to which they're participatory, I think, depends upon what the client and the team ultimately decide.
Hello?
Hello?
Yes, sorry. Thank you, Nate. Can we then, Eduardo, are you? Hello, Eduardo?
Yes?
Okay. Yes, please. Can you then continue to answer the questions for you?
Yes. I don't know if both questions were from Miguel, but I will.
No, the second one was the second one, and I'm sorry that I didn't read the.
Don't worry.
Let me.
No, don't worry, Maria. I will.
It was from the second one was
Okay.
from Sarah Lubberger.
Okay. Okay. I will try to combine. Hopefully, you don't mind. I will try to combine my answer to this
Yes.
question, because the second one from Sandra was about the challenges we're facing in order to achieve the M&E process here in Mexico with adaptation, in order to achieve adaptation to climate change. And the one from Miguel was regarding to information about how, in which state of the NDC are we on. So I will try to combine both of these, because the main or the biggest challenge we're facing right now in adaptation matters refers to the detailing of the NDC. We have already committed our NDC, so we have to detail to give, like I said in my presentation, to define the who's going to be the responsible of each action, or who are going to be the responsible, because not has to be only one person. Who are going to, which institute, which is the contribution that the state are going to do in order to achieve the goals of adaptation in the NDCs, how they're going to do it, who is going to do it. We have to get more detail on this information, because right now the NDC as has been submitted is still doesn't have clear information about how we're going to do it, who's going to do it. So we have to detail this particular information in order, is the next step for the NDCs, and is the big challenge to detail this information, but also to create a system, an M&E system that will help us to make this, to give an idea of how we're progressing on our goals. And also regarding to Miguel's question about how we're going to face the national situation and how it is related with the NDC implementation. Well, first of all, we have this. We have submitted our NDCs to the United Nations Framework on Climate Change, and we already signed ratified the Paris Agreement. So we have this international commitment. We cannot step back. So we have to do it. And we have, like I showed in presentation, we have some unconditional actions and some conditional actions. The unconditional actions are the ones that we have to do as a country, the public administration, the federal public administration, but also the municipalities, the states, the society in general has to push in order to achieve the goals of these unconditional actions, which are reducing of vulnerability for the social sector, for the infrastructure sector, and ABE, the ecosystem-based adaptation, sorry, EBA in English, the EBA component. And on the conditional actions, we have the transference of technology, adaptive capacity learning process, and these are the ones that only are conditioned by international exchange and international help. So, but on the unconditional part, we have to do it doesn't care of the situation, the economic situation of the country, because it's a commitment with the United Nations framework of climate change. Hopefully that will answer both of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Eduardo, can you then address the questions for you? Hello?
Yes?
Oh, I'm sorry. I sorry about that. I made a mistake. I have a question for Nate from Martin Obermeyer. He's an adaptation researcher from Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. And he says he's interested in knowing how or if the system that or the approach that you presented includes spillovers, feedbacks between different sectors, from agricultural sector to, for example, from agricultural sector to forest or water resources. And then I have another question that I think can be for both of you. This is from Martin Rokitsky. He's an international adaptation consultant based in Berlin, Germany. And how do you suggest to overcome the ambiguity or lack of definition, complexity of many of the terms used, such as resilience, vulnerability, adaptive capacity, etc., when it comes to the acceptance and usefulness of the results measured? Can Nate answer the first one, and both of you address this issue of, how to deal with these terms that are sometimes not very well defined or not generally defined. And also from Silvia Lima, how much appropriate indicators depend on a good initial environmental assessment, basic data, and modeling? How this knowledge gap impacts the ability to choose the most appropriate adaptation action and correspondent indicators, avoiding maladaptation and making it possible to measure adaptation efforts in terms of reducing the impacts of climate change and not on completion of tasks. So if you can, Nate, address the first one, and sure. Eduardo, and both of you, the second and the third.
Great.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So on Martin's question, hi Martin, I know Martin. I think that this is a really great question, and the way I described it was that we're doing it on a sectoral approach, or basing it on the way that the different practice groups are building resilience. But I should mention that we have the flexibility in the way that we're doing this to include people from different sectors when you're dealing with issues around, for example, land use, where there's multiple sectors involved, whether it be the transport, forests and agriculture teams, for example. So we have a cross-cutting group that's trying to think through some more of these cross-cutting issues. So it's not only agriculture specialists developing the agricultural approach. So that's a really good question, and I think it points to the cross-sectoral or multi-sectoral nature that Eduardo was mentioning as well. And then on the other Martin's question, I think that you're pointing to the very reason that we've decided to approach it this way, that there is a lot of ambiguity in some of the terms used, or at least there's not an agreed upon definition. One thing we did not want to do was to get into a very academic debate about needing to define very clearly what resilience means and have a universal definition. Rather, we decided to deduce the principles that build resilience and ask our teams to interpret them and define them within their own projects. And then the way that I feel that gives more the robustness to the results and doesn't water down what we're doing is, one, if you're building these based on, you're selecting indicators, building them based on a really sound theory of change, you can at least articulate and defend the narrative for how you get to the indicators and then the outcomes. And then second, it's focusing on, a lot of our projects are focusing on these intermediate outcomes, which aren't necessarily achieving even the principle that we're talking about, but at least we're showing that it's on the pathway to achieving the principle. That's the whole idea behind it. And then, in addition to that, building in this learning mechanism so that we can actually say, hey, we're not claiming that we are 100% confident in this, but we do have an intention to build the evidence base. That's an ideal situation, and that's really the impetus. Your question is getting at the impetus for why we designed it this way in the first place. And then finally, I think, having a sound environmental assessment, I think, is always a really important thing to have for a project, but probably especially for a project when you're building resilience, so you can look at avoiding maladaptation, as you said. One of the things that we're trying to do really focusedly in our institution is, in addition to combining the ways that we measure resilience at the national level versus the project level, we're also trying to conceptualize the resilience story at the national level and then reconcile that with what projects we do. So building in an ability to avoid maladaptation by having a country strategy that we engage with our country clients with, that actually points to the types of projects that would build resilience broadly within the country, and then making sure that those projects are fitting with that strategy, the projects that we ultimately decide to do. So that's another way of linking the two to avoid maladaptation. So I'll turn it over to Eduardo now. Thank you very much for those questions.
Thank you. Eduardo, please go ahead.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Ana Maria. Well, regarding to the question of Martin, I completely agree with Nathan, with all that he has already said. And I will emphasize this learning process that are a key element in order to develop strategies for adaptation to climate change. We have to include different angles, different cross-sectoral actors, like Nathan said, in order to reach different sectors, to reach different public. In the particular case of the working group in adaptation policies that I have already spoke of, it includes actors from the public administration only, but going from the energy sectors up to some institutions that are focused on gender equality matters topics. So including all these cross-sectoral sectors is one of the approach we're using in order to have a common, like I said, a common base language to understand what is adaptation to climate change. And of course, afterwards what is monitoring and evaluating adaptation. And also we have another group that in these working groups from the Interministerial Commission that vinculates the public administration efforts with NGOs, with social organizations, with the public in general. It's like direct channel of communication in order to transmit the effort that the public administration is doing. And I think these work from different angles is a key element to achieve, to reduce the complexity of terms, to increase how, until what point we are, to increase the public we are reaching on. And Maria, I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand the last question from Sylvia. It was related with the uncertainty of climate change models and climate information?
No, it was because she said that to have the most appropriate actions and indicators on adaptation, one should have, environmental initial assessments, initial environmental assessments, some basic data, some capacities for modeling, and as I understand, this is a knowledge gap that many countries in the region. So how important is it is to address those knowledge gaps in order to ensure that we are doing a good job?
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. I will answer your question, Sylvia. Like I said in my presentation, Mexico has this commitment of using the best science possible. In our national strategy of climate change, we develop a strong and really careful analysis of vulnerability that includes the best data available, that includes vulnerability assessments, risk assessment, climate change models, climate change tendencies. We have take all these elements from the science in order to make the best decision, the best possible decisions, in order to achieve or to identify the best actions to reduce vulnerability, to increase resilience, to increase adaptive capacity. It has to be hand by hand. This best science possible, the best science possible of the country, it has to be hand by hand with the decision making. And I think Let's Lack platforms like the Let's Lack platform, regional platform, is a key element in order to achieve these goals. In order to achieve these hand-by-hand decisions, because in order not only Mexico, not only Peru has needs for information, also Mexico has some needs in certain information. So the sharing between countries, the sharing between international, not only Latin America, but also global exchange of information is a key element in order to achieve our goals. Like I said, in our NDC, that's one of the conditional actions, which are the transfer of technology and information.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. And I know Nate, he has to leave in 2 minutes, but I would like to ask you both 2 final questions, and apologize to those who we couldn't answer the questions. I have been writing to them saying that we will contact you directly with the panelists to answer if that's okay with them. Just 2 final questions, and Nate, I know you are going to answer and then disconnect. Thank you very much for being with us and for the time you have and the knowledge that you have shared with us. There is, I think, an important question: how to separate vulnerability to climate change from current vulnerability due to lack of infrastructure in developing countries. How to isolate the climate change effects. And then also there is a final question, and in which way the uncertainty of climate change scenarios could be managed in adaptation measures. So Nate, if you could quickly comment on that, and then you maybe give a few words of farewell.
Yeah, that's great. No, I'll definitely do that. So these are really, all of the questions, as I've said, are just really excellent.
I think we could do another webinar.
Yeah, definitely. And they're questions that we are constantly asking. I think some of these questions get more into project design and how we conceptualize a project, but definitely relates to the monitoring and evaluation approach. So by focusing on resilience to climate and disaster risks, I think that it's inherently trying to recognize by just that framing that there's general vulnerability and then there's vulnerability to these sorts of risks. But what we've tried to emphasize by focusing on the principles in our projects is that it can cover both, and there isn't necessarily a need to distinguish. However, that doesn't mean that climate change shouldn't be taken into consideration when you're doing project planning and project design. And what we encourage teams to do, and now they're required to do, is before a project is approved, every project that we have has to go through, I should say almost every project that we have has to go through a climate and disaster risk screening process to see if it's at risk for failing, if climate change, if climate change is to play out as expected or as along the lines of multiple types of scenarios. And we have tools and resources for teams to do that, and some of them are publicly available. In particular, I would direct people to what's called the World Bank's Climate and Disaster Risk Screening Tools, and those are publicly available. And they're a form of them that we have our teams use internally for every project. They don't have to use those tools, but they have to do the risk screening and assessment. And then if significant risks are identified, what teams are then encouraged to do is do a more robust vulnerability or resilience assessment. And even think about, especially with infrastructure projects, doing decision making under uncertainty analyses where you can do multiple scenarios and consider multiple uncertain factors such as population growth, demand on water resources, for example, land use patterns, whatever it might be, and climate change being one of those elements of uncertainty that is then incorporated into the project design, and then multiple climate change scenarios can be used. So a lot of teams are doing those exercises for the projects that are particularly at risk to climate change. So those are just some ideas for how to build the uncertainty into our project design and make sure that at least every project is going through a due diligence screening. So I hope that at least starts to get to some of those questions. And again, I just want to say I'm sorry I've got to go, but thank you all for your participation. It's exciting to see so many people interested in this topic, and I look forward to the next one, Ana Maria, and answering any questions over email. And I'll also share the resources with you that I was talking about, Ana Maria. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nate. Have a great day. And then Eduardo, if you can also then address the two questions. How do you separate, how you isolate climate change vulnerability to existing vulnerability, and then how you take into account climate change scenarios when you are developing adaptation measures.
Okay, thank you, Ana Maria. Well, like I already said before, but I think it's important to remark it. In my presentation, in the timeline, first, before that, I want to say that I don't think it has to be isolated completely, like these two concepts, because yes, of course, there is vulnerability exclusively to hydrometeorological increased events or more intense events, droughts, hurricanes, etc. There's like this conception of hydrometeorological events as direct climate change impacts. But also there are some vulnerability. Finally, the vulnerability will be increased not only by the exposition to these hazards, but also from the for the vulnerability of the people. So the infrastructure, the need of better infrastructure or the lack of infrastructure is a key element on the climate change analysis and on the adaptation to climate change identification of actions. So it doesn't have to be completely isolated, but we have to be really clear of our idea of our analysis when we are identifying hazards, when we are identifying what is the impacts that we are facing and that are related with climate change. Now, what I was saying at the beginning, if you afterwards see my presentation in the timeline, at the end of 2015, beginning of 2016, here in the direction of climate change policies and with the help of also coordinated with the National Institute of Ecology and Climate Change, we developed a tool that is minimum elements for the elaboration of climate change programs for the states, for the state government. Now, this is like a tool that is specifically for states, governments in Mexico, but has some key elements that, like the name says, are the minimum elements which should be considered in order to make a plan, to make a program of climate change. It has, of course, a component of mitigation, but also has a component of adaptation, which states that you need first clear analysis, a strong analysis of climate change models, vulnerability. You need the participation of different actors, cross-sectoral actors. You need the participation of society, and all of these help you in order to take the best, to identify the best actions possible to achieve adaptation to climate change. But it doesn't have to be completely isolated. It has to be part of your decision. It has to be really close on the analysis. But with your, you have to have in mind really which are the impacts that are related with climate change and which are the impacts that are not related with. Thank you.
Thank you, Eduardo. I really appreciate your contribution to our work in Let's Lack, both in this webinar and with your participation in other discussions that we are having on the issue of integrating adaptation, mitigation, and development. I wish you much success with the work that you are doing, and I really hope we already have on the chat several people saying yes. We hope we do another webinar on this topic that is so interesting to so many people. I would like to thank you again for being with us and give you the chance for to say goodbye to our audience.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much for the kind invitation. Thank you, Ana Maria. Thank you, Maria Jose. Thank you, Alejandra. All of you for making all this effort to let us be part of the Let's Lack regional platform and to let us reach more than just Latin America. I want to thank all of the participants in this webinar. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to share the experience of Mexico in behalf of the General Direction of Climate Change Policies, and in behalf of the Resiliencia Project. I want to thank you all, and hopefully this has been interesting for all of you. You have already my contact, and I will be working hopefully in the future again with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I would like to remind you that the recording of this webinar, together with the PowerPoint presentations And the materials that the presenters are going to share with us are going to be available at the Let's Lack webpage. So we hope that you join us in the next webinars that we have prepared for you throughout the year. We have many interesting topics to share experiences and knowledge from different parts of Latin America and international partners. So we hope that we will have your participation in our future events. Thank you very much and have a great day.